with that, I would like to introduce a very special person who I met recently. And I met her over Zoom, like we meet so many people these days. And then I had the great honor to meet her in person in Boston for the first time. I was blown away by this lady. Never met her before, didn't know her. First time I talked to her on the phone for an hour. We basically spoke the same language. So I want to introduce you to our keynote speaker. She's a plant breeder by training, brings over 25 years experience of international agriculture research with the coffee community. Before taking her current position in 2019, she led the Office of Agriculture Research and Policy at the U.S. Agency for International Development, previously served as a Science and Policy Fellow at USDA's Foreign Ag Service, who we know as FAS, working on phytosanitary and sanitary trade barriers in plants and plant products. In these roles, she worked closely with commodity associates to develop collaborative research partnerships with scientists in the U.S. and abroad to tackle shared production challenges. She received a PhD in plant breeding from Cornell University. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Vern, the CEO of World Coffee Research. Vern, thank you.
Aloha. It's wonderful to be here today with all of you. It's been a few years that I've been starting off in coffee. I joined the world of coffee in 2019 and have been learning a great deal ever since. So I think it was really good that I had some training wheels before I came to the experts, because I really want to build this collaboration that we have, that you all have been working on yourselves at a state level, and really be that bridge at a global level. And that's why it's really exciting at this moment in time to come here and meet all of you. We've taken a few weeks, over the last week, we've moved around the state to really get a chance to see production. We visited a few farms here in Kona. We went down to Ka'u and visited a few other farms. And it's been a really important learning journey for us as an organization as we start to build our collaboration with you. And we hope that this collaboration can move from this first visit to Hawaii this week to something much stronger over the months and years ahead. So I'm really excited for this chance to talk with you all today. So, you know, one of the biggest challenges that you're facing is something that has been around, there we go, for quite some time. This is an image from Ceylon, from Sri Lanka, from the 1880s, where coffee leaf rust devastated the industry. And coffee leaf rust has been a scourge for farmers for decades, well over a century at this point. And the consequence of this is that many coffee communities around the world, and what you all have experienced over the last 2 years as you face this really existential challenge to your way of production and your way of life, is that you find that it is working together that helps you make progress. The other thing that we see with communities who have faced these big challenges together is there's also a moment in a crisis where it's really helpful to take a step back and look at the big picture. Because sometimes when you're so focused on this one issue that is just absolutely overwhelming where you are, it's also helpful to have the big picture in mind, because sometimes you can solve some of these, what are your immediate critical crisis, with solutions that have much broader benefits over time. And so what I want to share with you is some of the thinking that's been going on both in our community at World Coffee Research, but with the partners we work with around the world. And we are a global organization. We have staff in 15 countries. We're in 9 time zones. And we very much work with researchers around the world to advance the future of coffee and enhance supply. And so we're bringing this global vision here to Hawaii for us to start sharing our experiences and developing a path forward for both your industry and the global industry. So one thing I wanted to flag here for those of you who haven't had a chance to take a moment back is to read a book by Stuart McCook. This is where we got this image, actually. It's a story of leaf rust and the history. And sometimes when you anchor yourself in history, it gives you perspective about how to handle the current challenge. So I just offer that as an opportunity for you all to really dig into this if you haven't had a chance to read about that history of leaf rust. But so the other piece that we found about this history of leaf rust is that, farmers are really good at solving problems on your own. You are there in the moment, you know your farm, you know the challenges you're facing, and you come up with solutions on the fly. You observe what's going on your farm, you innovate, you develop solutions. But there are some things for which collaboration and engaging with others, and not even just at a state level, but at a global level, will accelerate your progress in identifying solutions, because sometimes when the challenge is great, you need a lot of innovation and a lot of thinking from a lot of other farmers around the world to find the best bet solutions for you in that moment. And I think what's really exciting and inspiring about farmers is that as much as you do control what you do on your farm, you're also pretty aware that you are dependent on a few things which you don't have control over. The sun, rain, these are all things that you live with Mother Nature giving you or not giving you, and then you innovate around those things. And so there's a level of certainty that we found with the farming community around the world and dealing with challenges, that there are some things you just know they're out of your hands, and then there are some things that you can actually control. Research. And so there was a former head of the Soybean Association who testified before Congress about what he looks for to support his work as a soybean farmer. And he said he needs 3 things as a farmer: sun, rain, and research. Those are the things that are outside his control. He needs other people to do that work. And I think that that's something that we know as farmers. You all innovate on your farm, you engage with your peers and your friends and colleagues to find those innovative solutions. But there are some things where you really need to look to the scientific community to provide that efficiency of developing innovation. And you all have done that here in Hawaii over the last 2 years, bringing together the scientific community, the regulatory authorities, the state authorities, bringing all of these actors together to innovate solutions, sometimes working through your differences, and sometimes you have to just set them aside because of the urgency of the situation. But what's really exciting about what you've done here is that you are really well positioned to take this to the next level, which is, in the end, why we're here. So World Coffee Research is a global organization. We have 3 staff, myself, our director of R&D, Tanya, who's in the back, and Jorge, who's in the back sitting with the PBARC folks. Please talk to them, because we really want to bring that global perspective and global thinking to infuse your own thinking about what's possible with research, but also for us to hear from you about what your needs are and what that research agenda should look like. So one of the things that we ask is, what has research delivered? And in the end, one of the key deliveries that's happened over the last 60, 70 years has been varieties. Varieties have been a really critical tool for addressing the challenges of leaf rust. And these varieties you'll see, this is a picture from Brazil. On the left, you'll see susceptible trees, and on the right, you'll see resistant varieties. And that innovation came because of a global response to the threat that leaf rust posed in 1967. So the last time there was a global response to developing new varieties for leaf rust resistance was in 1967. It was a program initiated by the Portuguese, by the Rust Research Center there, underwritten in part by USDA along with many other governments. They made crosses with the Timor hybrids and sent that out across the world, which has been the foundation of germplasm that many have used to develop leaf rust resistant materials. And that came from a global initiative in 1967. And so one of the things I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk is that at World Coffee Research, we're going to do another one of those big global crossing processes to infuse the community with totally new combinations that can be helpful for addressing leaf rust and other pests and diseases that you may be facing in the decades ahead. And so when you think about what research has delivered, it's technology that's responsive to the challenges at hand. But one of the most important messages that I want to continuously reiterate throughout this talk and our time here together over the next couple of days is the critical importance of the farming community to communicate to researchers what it is that you need. Because demand-led research, demand-led breeding, demand-led crop protection products, the more that researchers understand what you're trying to achieve, the more effective those solutions will be and the more responsive they are. And so it's really exciting to see that researchers are here in force, regulatory authorities are here in force, and state and federal representatives are here, because it's this cross-pollination of our community from all different sides that helps us develop more innovative solutions that are really responsive to your needs. And when we think about what mechanisms we have, I would say that it's clear that the just presence here, being here today, is the first step in making sure that your voice is heard and that you start to make those connections with folks who are really excited and motivated to start addressing your challenges. But until we really truly understand exactly what you're facing, it's really hard to develop the right solution. So that's the conversation that, if there's nothing else that you get out of my talk today, it's the value of this room and cross-pollinating across all these tables to make sure that everybody from across this community is speaking to each other and we're starting to hear each other and understand our collective needs. Because that's the exciting thing about science, is science is just a tool to solve problems. And so the better we can define the problem, the better we can develop a tool. So one of the things that I think is really helpful in thinking about innovation is, again, that's that taking that step back. So we know that with this response, variety development was a critical tool that helps farmers address leaf rust. And one of the things I want to do is take a step back and look at the big picture, because it isn't just about leaf rust. For any of you, and I was speaking at the table over here with Brandon, I think, is talking about it isn't just nematodes and it isn't just weeds. I wish it was only weeds, but it would be, but it's leaf rust and it's coffee berry borer. I mean, you have a lot of challenges that constrain production and can drive you crazy. And that's why we want to think about what's the whole host of challenges you're facing, and then what's the technology solution that may solve many of those at the same time, so that you don't have like 50 different products you have to apply for the 50 different challenges you have. So I'm going to take us way back to the big picture, 30,000 feet. This is what we see as the production trend. This is just total volume. And we see that Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia have done a tremendous job at really increasing production over the years. So as a percentage of global production, their contribution is around 60% of world production is coming from 3 countries. Now, I represent predominantly roasting companies. Roasters are who predominantly 86% of our revenue comes from roasters. And they're concerned about concentration of supply. Many companies, whether they're very large multinationals or really small micro roasters, they have a shared interest in sourcing coffee from diverse origins. They want to buy some of their coffee from Hawaii, they want to buy some of their coffee from Rwanda, some from PNG, some from Indonesia, because it's that diversity of coffee that excites consumers, and it's about the different flavor and experiences of coffee that all those different origins offer. And so when we see these huge trends of production volumes really, really cranking up in these other, just a few origins, that really threatens the ability of coffee companies to differentiate themselves in the market and create offerings that consumers have. If we can only buy coffee from Brazil, it's pretty boring for companies to try to differentiate themselves. So there is a strategic and strong shared interest from the roaster end of the supply chain at preserving many, many origins to allow companies to differentiate themselves. So part of the message that I'm here to deliver is that we are here with you and we stand with you to really tackle these challenges you have and succeed as an origin, as it were, to really create opportunity not only for yourselves, but for the companies that are also providing your products in coffee shops around the world. We really want to see that success because many origins is successful for us as an industry. And so it's very concerning that, of course, that production is concentrated in so few countries. So when we look at the underpinning factors that drive this, we see that productivity over the years, yield, has really has split. So when we look at the focus countries, so those are 11 countries. We kind of think of them as the second-tier export origins that are important to the industry to maintain that origin diversity. We see that productivity has really been flat in many of the countries beyond Brazil, Colombia, and Vietnam. And the consequence of that is, as you all know, there's a point at which it's just no longer profitable. If you don't get enough yield, it's just not gonna work. And so when we think about orienting the research agenda, it's this set of challenges that we have that I think are shared by you all, is that the challenges facing yield in many other producing countries are similar challenges that you're facing, and that if we solve it for everyone else, we can solve it for Hawaii as well, in terms of the kinds of technologies that help improve your productivity, reduce your cost of production. And so this is why we're thinking that as we think about this as a global problem and solving not just coffee leaf rust, but many of the other constraints to production, abiotic constraints, heat, drought, and biotic constraints, pests and diseases, this is the kind of thing that you can come up with a big solution that solves many things at once. So when we think about, why we find ourselves in this situation where productivity has really been flat for many, many producing countries, we start to look at what's the innovation underneath that story. What are farmers using to drive productivity? And if you just use a simple metric of innovation, so it's not perfect, coffee is different from many other specialty crops, but as just sort of a blunt rule of thumb, like a blunt measure of innovation, you can look at the registrations of plant varieties. So if you look at the number of varieties that are registered in the for plant breeding protection, plant variety protection, there are over 6,000 varieties of strawberries. But in the system now for plant varieties for coffee, there's only 111. And you think about the global production value of coffee, it's north of $18 billion. And we rely on 111 varieties. Now, of course, we all know as farmers that there's more than 111 varieties in practice, but there's a lot of material out there that was never registered. But the point is that the innovation that underpins our industry is wildly out of whack with the relative value of this industry globally. And you think, why are there so few varieties? What's that about? And when you think about where coffee is produced, it's in a lot of countries that are blue. So this is just a World Bank map that characterizes countries by their income level. So there's sort of low, lower middle income, and high income. So the United States is a high income country. Countries like Guatemala they recently became a middle income. Papua New Guinea is a low income country. So when you think about where coffee is produced, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, it's low income countries where they have a lot of competing interests. So it's not like they're going to put every dollar into research. There's a lot of other needs: building roads, building schools, building health clinics, building infrastructure. And so there's not as much investment available for coffee agricultural research. There's not as much coffee ag R&D money. It's just a basic economics question. So if many of the varieties around the world are coming from countries that have limited investment, then you're basically depending on innovation in resource-constrained environments. And there's some metrics you can use to figure out, so what's the right amount of money somebody should spend on ag R&D? What is the right number? And economists tell us it's about 1% to 2% of agricultural GDP. So if your country gets a lot of money from exports of agricultural products, like Brazil, where they are a second largest global agricultural exporter in the world, they spend a lot of money on R&D, 1.8%. So they're well above that 1% threshold. So they really drive that innovation. And that's why we see a lot of varieties coming out of Brazil. It's no wonder. They put the investment in, and they've had the pipeline of innovation to support their farmers over the years. And when we look at the other coffee countries that are really important from a roaster perspective, Honduras is a top 5 exporter. But when you look at them, it's 0.17%. So they're like a fifth of what's required relative to the importance of agriculture to their economy. And when we look at the actual spend on agricultural R&D at the National Coffee Institute, it is shockingly low for a country that is so dependent on coffee exports. But it's because if they have a hurricane, they need to spend their money on putting their roads back in so their coffee can get outside, get to the port. So they're making rational investment decisions for the short and medium term. The consequence to coffee is huge because the innovation needed to support coffee production is just not happening because the investment isn't there. And so when we think about, you know, these trends and this reality, this is really what led to the birth of WCR. So coffee roasters came together about 10 years ago, sat together in a room in Texas, and looked at this landscape. The reality that investment is limited, the needs are great. We as an industry benefit tremendously by having diverse origins, and yet how do we organize ourselves to orient those resources towards the most strategic investment portfolio for developing innovation to support farmers in the short, medium, and long term? And so WCR was born. So our job is to connect the industry, so the roasters whom I represent, to coffee producers and define that shared agenda. What is it that we all need to do? And bring cutting-edge science to bear on that agenda. And so one of the other things that's been really important that is less of an issue for you all here in Hawaii, but is a bigger issue in other producing areas and other producing countries, is that the researchers developing varieties or developing innovation for coffee agriculture are working with farmers who are really focused on the production challenges. But as you all know, with your very special market niche as Hawaiian growers, and even within that, you know, Kona coffee with a very specific profile, is that you also need to know about your market. And one of the limitations of many producing countries is they don't have contact with the market that they serve or the market that they supply. And so researchers aren't able to verify that the quality spec that they're developing in the coffee is really consistent with the Italian buyers or the Japanese buyers who want to buy that coffee. And so that's another part of our role, is to bridge that relationship between national coffee institutes who are at the front lines of doing research and making sure that it's connected to their relevant markets. So my membership is global. We have Japanese roasters, South Korean, Australian, European, Canadian, and American roasters who are all really motivated to help support the development of innovation that really hits that market spec. And so this is something that as we work to more closely engage with you all in the years, months and years ahead in these research collaborations, is really taking some of what you all have learned about this, because some of you are even vertically integrated from crop to cup, is learning how you've done that and what kinds of tools and approaches you've had that might be helpful to others. So I think this moment we found is that when you're facing an existential challenge like you all are facing, collaboration is key. And there are some places where collaboration can actually increase your competitive position. And that's the kind of approach that we seek to develop at WCR, is a co-opetition model where you cooperate to increase your competitive advantage, recognizing that every single origin and even every single farmer who has different market opportunities wants to figure out what's that sweet spot between cooperating and competing. And so we sit at that nexus of co-opetition, developing the kinds of research collaborations that are cooperative and collaborative that drive competitive opportunity. I work for the private sector. I work for roasters for the entire spectrum, and they're all competing with each other, but they're all existentially linked to growers around the world, because if we can't handle the challenges that climate change is throwing at us, none of us will be in business. And so this is this moment that co-opetition is the model of the 21st century. We've got to figure it out, and this is what we're really excited to talk with you all about, is how do we find that sweet spot to make sure that cooperation's happening where it needs to, but gives you the freedom and flexibility for your competitive position. So one of the things that I also want to flag, which I already raised a little bit earlier, is that agricultural R&D is simply a tool to deliver what you need. And that the more you communicate to researchers on what you need, recognizing that there are short-term needs, medium-term needs, and long-term needs, this is what researchers want to hear to understand that landscape, because the coffee of the future needs to be tailored to the, what farmers want and what the market is demanding. So I have a number of coffee companies who really want to see agroforestry, very densely shaded production systems, because they want to see biomass-rich landscapes that are sucking up carbon in response to the climate crisis. So there are farmers who are in a position to do that, but they need technology that works in a heavily forested environment. You need highly productive, profitable varieties and management systems to make all that work. We also know that there are some growers who really want to be and are happy to be in full sun production, and that production system requires different varieties and different management tools. And so when we think about what we're trying to achieve as researchers, it's really about ensuring we understand the demand signal both from the producer and what the market is willing to pay for on the roaster end to really think about what's that technology portfolio that delivers for everyone, recognizing it's going to be different for different farmers around the world. So this leads us to the WCR portfolio. So this is a bit of a shift in the talk from like that big picture thinking to kind of get your juices flowing about this idea of co-opetition models and how's this going to work for Hawaii, because you all are very diverse as a community. There are many different kinds of growers here and voices and needs, and understanding how we link that with the portfolio that we have at a global level, and then what will be cascading with our partnerships with PBARC and HARC in the months and years ahead. So WCR recognizes that we need to develop innovations and technologies that are in short, medium, and long term. And as I've heard here spoken many times, many of you have said, well, I thought I had this variety, but I have no way of knowing that it really is the variety that I thought it was. Well, let me tell you, there are 12.5 million other farmers who say the exact same thing. So the challenge is that there are supply, the coffee variety supply chains. It's difficult to get genetic purity testing. And so that's something over the last couple of years, we've developed a low-cost tool that we've been using on a pilot basis to clean up seed lots so that we verify that these seed lots are true to type. So we've been doing this throughout Central America. We've just completed a pretty comprehensive work in El Salvador with the government there to clean up seed lots to get true to type materials so that anybody who's buying a pacamara knows that it's truly a pacamara, it's true to type. And so that kind of a tool is the sort of technology we brought into our nursery program, really cleaning up seed lots and giving certainty to both farmers and national authorities who are funding or underwriting these large renovation campaigns to know that this material that's going into farmers' fields is genuinely what we think it is, and it has the profile and features that farmers are expecting. Because there's nothing worse than installing a tree you thought was leaf rust resistant and isn't. And so that certainty is critical for everyone to be able to respond in a thoughtful way with the challenges you're facing. So our program is about developing tools and technologies that ensure that materials are true to type. We also have a lot of guides on our website that talk about, plant propagation and management, something that probably less useful for you all because given your experience and capacity, but they are there if you're interested in looking at how our guides are structured. We also recognize that you all need material that works. So in our trial program, we have mobilized germplasm from around the world, elite varieties from other producing countries, and we have installed them in many different locations. We've now gotten to 3 years of harvest at a number of those locations, and so we can report on the performance of varieties from around the world in many locations. And we've actually provided that information to Chris and Kimo in their conversations with state authorities on what varieties should be brought into the state to continue to create opportunity for Hawaiian growers, as you all face the challenges of leaf rust. We have data on leaf rust resistance for a variety of many varieties and can give you that information now. The trees are here in the state. All of them are here at PBARC. They got out of quarantine, so we're one step closer to the process of facilitating access to that material. So this is a very practical program that we have global data on. They're publicly available. It's on our website. We have webinars in Spanish and English that you can watch to learn about what these varieties are doing, how they're performing, and we'll be updating that every year as we get another year of data on the existing trials. And so that'll be helpful for you all as you think about what your priorities are and what kind of feedback you want to give to USDA and the state authorities about what varieties you really would like to use based on the available data in other countries, recognizing that you don't really have a lot of time to figure out, it's not like you all can just install a trial and wait 15 years and see what was best. So you're going to have to make the best use of the data that's available at a global level and the scientific capacity of the researchers here who can really help guide making the best decision in a really uncertain world. And so that's what we really seek to do, is provide the evidence base and the data so that you can make as well-informed a decision as you can, recognizing that, there's a lot of uncertainty with these things. Finally, we have our breeding program, which we'll be talking about in a bit more detail, which is something where we realize that a breeding program sounds like an incredibly long-term kind of endeavor, but at the end of the day, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is right now. And that's how we feel about the breeding program, is if we don't get started at a global level, we're always going to say, that's just too far away. Why should we do that? You should do it because at a minimum, it's a gift to your children or your grandchildren to whom you're going to give your farm, and this allows them to have a robust and vibrant commercial business in the years ahead. And so in the same way as people save for college for their kids, think of this breeding program as part of that legacy intergenerational transfer of love into the trees that you all sent to your kids. So I'm going to shift and pivot into practical information, because I know when I'm talking to farmers like, yeah, global trends, who cares? I really want to know what variety I should plant. So here's where we're going to start. We have a variety catalog on our website. Understandably, it's not perfect, but it is underpinned with evidence and data. So if you go, you can click through and you can find some of the data sources. A few people have mentioned that there's some data missing, and we're going to correct it. So we're going to get those up there so that you can see the data that underwrites the sort of easy-to-use farmer guide. And this guide was really developed with the intention of lower capacity, lower literate farmers to be able to use it, so it's not really data heavy, it's sort of pictorial in the way that it approaches the data. But that was because we were trying to be able to communicate effectively with a broad array of farmers around the world. This is our most downloaded product. Over 500,000 downloads have happened on this variety catalog, and we are updating it this year. So by the end of this year, you're going to see a new flush of material included, including Robusta, although that's not such an interest for you all. But it's free, it's online, and it's available at our website. This is a first cut for the kinds of varieties that are available. The next thing is this multi-location variety trial, and I'm going to look to the back. So if I start going over time, somebody needs to wave at me. You just tell me when I got to get off. Okay, so the multi-location variety trial is when we reached out to countries around the world, Indonesia, India, East African countries, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Central American countries from Guatemala, Honduras to Peru, and they provided germplasm. Brazil and Colombia also entered materials into this variety trial. So we took all of these varieties and we distributed them to 17 environments around the world. And I think there's like 22 sites within those 17 countries. And we also have this set of trees are at P-bark, and they were out of quarantine now. So the point of this trial was taking elite materials that have been the bedrock of Kenyan production, of Indian production over the last 40 years, and look at how they're performing around the world to find those winners, the materials that do well, whether they're in a hot, dry environment or a wet, cold environment. What's their leaf rust resistance, what's their yield, and what's their cupping quality? Because at the end of the day, it's great if it performs well in the field, but if it doesn't perform in the cup, it's out of there. So these data are all available. We have some recorded webinars where each year, as we get more and more of the data, we then give the update, and that's on our website. So you can watch the video of the performance of these materials. And so this is just an example, but and Jorge's here, and he's the brains behind all of these analyses. So he's the guy in the red shirt, if you want to ask him. Yeah, now he needs, Okay, so the thing about these data is that we have a good understanding about how stable they are. So do they do well in hot, dry places and wet, cold places, which means that when you think about climate change and choosing a variety that you're going to put in the ground for 30 years, and you don't know how your microclimate's going to change in Hawaii with climate change over the next 30 years, these kinds of data tell us more about stability, which helps you make a more informed choice about, okay, what's going to work now, but it's also going to be pretty stable over the years so that you don't have to worry about changing it out early because it just couldn't cut it in the new environment that's rapidly falling on us. And so these kinds of stability parameters, cupping quality, leaf rust resistance, yield, all of these data are in the presentation, so you can go variety by variety, location by location, and try to triangulate with where you are and what the data tell you. So you can have at least a little bit more information instead of the shot in the dark, throw a dart at the variety catalog and find something new. Like, this should help you a little bit in guiding that process. So the next part about this is that we want to talk a bit about the breeding programs. This is the gift that you want to give to your children and grandchildren as you pass your farm along to the next generation. And so WCR has been working on the development of genomic tools, really getting the tools in place to develop a faster, better, cheaper breeding program, as well as negotiating germplasm access. That's not an insignificant thing. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the challenges of moving germplasm around the world, not just on a phytosanitary basis, but on an intellectual property basis. And so we've been negotiating these agreements with countries around the world to get everybody on board, because we've gotten to this point where many countries realize that a co-opetition model is where we've got to go, and that the competitive value of their individual variety, for the moment, it may be competitive, but with the climate crisis looming in front of us, we need completely new germplasm. And if we work together, it increases our individual competitive advantage. And so that's been a really important selling point for getting countries to lean in and provide germplasm for this co-opetition model. We started the crosses. Jorge was in El Salvador in the month of March making crosses so that we're crossing really different stuff with each other to bring new types of leaf rust resistance to sort of 1967 2.0. So we're bringing in some of the Liberica rust resistance genes that are totally different from the Timor hybrid source of resistance, and starting to create more robust combinations that nobody has, and we really need to develop much better combinations for the future. So in the fall, in November, we'll be harvesting these seeds and we'll be sending them out to partners. So we're working with USDA. We spent the day on Wednesday meeting with the USDA team at PBARC to really understand they brought us to the field and showed us where we can plant the trees. But these crosses will be sent here to Hawaii for the purposes of evaluation, and then those crosses would become the foundation of variety development for anyone around. There's going to be freedom to operate, terms of access, so that anybody can use the material, and there's no intellectual property restrictions that prevent you from using it. So this is a really important global public good that we're generating in collaboration with national research institutes around the world. So one of the things I just want to reinforce is that we know that when you collaborate, you can accelerate progress. And I think that this is one of those things where when we think about what it took to fight the pandemic, when we heard about COVID in 2020, they said, the fastest vaccine ever to market was 4 years, and it's probably going to be 10 years. Well, when you put your mind to it and you put money on the table, it's amazing what you can do. And we now have proof, it can actually happen, especially when the stakes are high. And I would say that everyone in this room probably feels like the stakes are high for Hawaiian coffee production. We really need to develop innovation fast, and we need to do it in a really careful and thoughtful way that's inclusive of the input of the broader community. Some of you really just want to have management options and control options because you have the varieties that you need for your market. There are others of you who are really motivated to find varieties that could give you a 2.0 on your production. And others of you who are thinking, I need whatever's out there. I just want to see what's out there. And so when we think about that, it's really about communication. As growers, we really look to you from the scientific community to help us refine and identify the priorities so that we can develop short, medium, and long-term outputs from research that solve your short, medium, and long-term needs. And this is where I sort of shift into thinking about our role as an organization in mobilizing investment, is that it's not just good enough to cooperate. Cooperation is great, but you also need investment to do this. And this is something that I'll be talking a little bit more about in my last slides, is how do we mobilize the required investment to take on something the scale of which you all are facing right now, the leaf rust existential crisis that really requires a concerted, collaborative agenda to address. So this Coffee Population Improvement Network is being launched in 2022. It involves co-opetition, and it also involves the requirement that we mobilize investment. So this is what I'm going to pivot to now. Okay, so how do we mobilize the investment and the political will to solve our collective problems? So in the end of last year, WCR joined forces with the National Coffee Association, which of course is the US industry association, WCR being global. My membership is global, but it includes a tremendous number of American companies. We teamed up with NCA to figure out what we could do to start tackling the challenges. And so we worked together to define our target agenda to really put the pieces in place politically to make it possible for us to mobilize the investment to move forward. So all the government people in their ears in the room can plug their ears, because this is about lobbying and dealing with Congress. Which as citizens and business owners and and farmers, this is our reality. We need to work together in new ways to tackle big challenges. So I met Suzanne through our work on USDA committee, talked to Dave Chun and Representative Kahele's office, and learned that there was this legislation that you all had put forward to start to tackle your pest and disease issues. And so the Coffee Plant Health Initiative Amendment Act was one of the responses to expanding the scope of work that USDA would be empowered to work on that's beyond just coffee berry borer, which is the old version of the CPHIAA legislation, to expanding it to all pests and diseases. And so that's a really important signal to have that in the legislation that says Congress agrees that coffee needs more than just one bug to be researched, but we need all pest and disease challenges to be addressed. And so this is a really important signal, and also to rally the roaster community around this shared agenda. We also realize that some of the research that's happening domestically really needs to be connected to this global community of researchers. And that's where there is a law that governs USAID funding in agricultural R&D. And we want to make sure as an organization that as investments are made at USDA, either through granting programs or ARS's activities, that they're absolutely aligned with our broader agenda on coffee in other parts of the government. Because there's nothing worse when you have, as you know, again, government people, plug your ears. I worked in the government for many years, so I was always on the receiving end of this. But the thing is like when you're trying to coordinate across many agencies, it's really hard. You have so many equities, you have so many people that you have to report to and explain things to, that it's really hard to keep all of those pieces together. But as a coffee community, we can do that by communicating with the USAID folks who are investing in research. They invest $150 million a year on research. So if it's going to connect to coffee, we want to know about it. And we want to know, and is there anything that might be useful to Hawaiian growers? Because there's actually a rule that says that any of these international research agreements have to be consistent with the goals and interests of the domestic industry. So if domestic growers disagree with the research priorities of this other agency, because I used to be at that other agency, so I know this well, is that you have to actually engage with the growers and make sure that there's a win-win for everyone here, so that U.S. growers and growers abroad benefit. And so that's a tremendously powerful tool that we can use to both increase the level of investment in coffee research around the world, because there are pests and diseases that aren't here yet. And you all did well to keep leaf rust at bay for as long as you did, but there are other diseases out there, and you just never know when it's going to hit. And so we do have a strategic interest in helping support the research in these other challenges, even though it may not be here in Hawaii now, but it provides protection when these arrive on your shores. And so it's this combination of engaging with USAID and the legislation that governs those investments, and engaging actively on USDA's investments in coffee research, that we can piece together and work with you as a domestic constituent for that agenda and make sure that every federal dollar that's spent on coffee really makes sense and is part of a big picture of short, medium, and long-term goals for coffee. So as we move forward into 2023, the Farm Bill, there's a lot of issues I'm sure that your community will be pursuing in the Farm Bill, from crop insurance to definition changes, et cetera, that help support coffee growers here in Hawaii. But there's also the big picture goals of getting coffee R&D really more explicitly peppered throughout. Like if there's one thing I'd say is my job, along with the Hawaiian grower community and your nexus organizations like Coffee, Chris and Suzanne, is to get the word coffee as many places in the Farm Bill as we can. So if that's all we can do, we'll have made progress. The other thing is the annual appropriations process. We work very closely with members on both sides of the aisle to explain the importance of coffee, the significance of coffee to our, the roasters who support WCR, but also your community, the Hawaiian coffee community, and understanding the significance of federal investment to support us as an industry globally. But that involves, again, that win-win. Every dollar spent should really be a win-win for the coffee community here in Puerto Rico, California, Texas, and then abroad. So these are just some of the statistics I want to offer you, because as you think about how on earth do I fit into any of this that she's talking about, these are some of the talking points that I think are helpful for you all to know. Because the most important thing that I want to bring to you from this part of the talk is that you're not alone. The challenges you're facing are actually challenges that concern the broader coffee industry. The roasters are very concerned about long-term supply. If there are not viable solutions to pests and diseases or to other challenges to production, if there isn't an attention to that, it puts our industry at risk. It also puts your day-to-day lives at risk if you're facing challenges for which there's no technological solution. So these kinds of statistics help make the case that it's not just about you, but you're part of something much bigger. And so I just offer them. It might take a few years to percolate, why were these numbers important? But over the next few months and years, we're going to figure it out together, and we'll be using these to educate our members of Congress and the agencies that help support our industry. So 1.6 million jobs in the United States are in the coffee industry. And so any kind of an investment the federal government makes isn't just about the 1,400 farmers in Hawaii who are in coffee. It's affecting the 1.6 million jobs, because anything that tackles the pest and disease challenges that you all have is going to benefit farmers around the world, and that helps support the 1.6 million jobs. So when you think of yourself, sometimes you might think that you're just a small industry, but you have tremendous power because of the significance of the challenges facing coffee to the broader industry on the mainland. The other thing is that we generate, as an industry, $28 billion in local, state, and federal taxes. That's a tremendous amount of investment that goes back to the government for all kinds of things. And so what we're saying as an industry is, we just want to mobilize a little bit of that $28 billion in tax revenue to support the R&D that's critical for our industry, both here in Hawaii and globally, because our industry depends on these diverse origins. If we just all concentrate down to Brazil, our companies can't differentiate themselves. And so these two numbers, 1.6 million jobs and $28 billion in tax revenue, are kind of the bookends of how we talk about why we're so important. It's not just Hawaii. You guys are part of something way bigger. And it's so important that we address your problems and your challenges, because the whole industry is dependent on this mobilization of the capacity of American science to really solve these challenges at a global level. And this leads us to the Coffee Plant Health Initiative. So we've been working really closely with Dave Chen, who I'm sure you all know well, and Representative Kahele's office, to understand how we can just tactically, step by step, engage with members across the Hill to get this legislation passed. And we're really pushing to get this moving. If we don't get it this year, we're definitely going to push to get it over the hurdle in the Farm Bill next year. So this legislation is really important as a marker to say, it's also about educating the Hill that Hawaiian agriculture is super important to us as roasters across America. Which brings me to this bigger idea, is that WCR has 190 companies in 25 countries, and we work together to mobilize the public and private investment and ensure the portfolio's relevance to industry. And that's why it's so exciting to be in this room, because we have the scientists and the state authorities who are here who are trying to figure out how do you balance this versus all the other needs that you have in your portfolio. That there's coffee communities, one thing, and then there's other growers of other commodities and other things. And so we are here to help you say, coffee's really important, and we push down together. And so that's what we really want to do together with you all, is to make sure that the kind of investment, the absolute level of investment goes up, but also that it's really targeted to the most important challenges in the short, medium, and long term. And that's why I wanted to reinforce this point that you're not alone. You all may feel like the challenges are huge and that trying to get anyone's attention in Washington seems like a futile effort. But you have this entire cheering squad on the mainland that you probably didn't even know about. Yesterday, I actually was on the phone with 4 companies, 2 very large multinationals, 1 regional coffee company from Louisiana, and 1 very small importer who services very tiny coffee shops from across in 26 states. And those 4 people joined me on a call with the Ag subcommittee, the minority staff on the Ag committee in Congress, and they explained why the Coffee Plant Health Initiative was important, why Hawaiian agriculture was important. And you didn't even know you had that cheering squad yesterday, talking to members of Congress, saying that leaf rust was an existential threat to production, and that this kind of legislation is critical for the long-term survival of the Hawaiian community. And you had like your own cheering squad talking to a member of Congress who himself comes from a farm, not a coffee farm, a cattle farm, but he gets it. He gets agriculture and the challenges you all face. And normally you get like 20 minutes with these guys. He talked to us for 45 minutes, asking tons and tons of questions. And so he even asked, like, what kind of pesticide or crop protection needs do you all have? And can you please send me the list y'all are trying to get through EPA? I thought, perfect. I'm on the phone with Suzanne and Chris to find out what the list is. This is the kind of access you have, and you can mobilize. And there's different needs, different communities. We totally get it. And the more we hear from you, and I really open up my ears to all the different perspectives you have, because this is the kind of engagement we can have with members of Congress. And you have this entire mainland support group who's there to advocate for the shared goals that we have, which is successful coffee production around the world, including Hawaii. So with that, I just wanted to leave you with a symbol of hope, which is a seedling that's totally going to make it. And, I think that the goals of my being here and my team being here is to listen to you all and to develop a long-term relationship because we're stronger together and misery loves company. So as we look at the months and years ahead, we really encourage you to reach out to us to give us critical feedback. Sometimes we're not going to get it right, and we need to hear from you and get that feedback so we can get it right. Okay, and with that, just like to leave you with this. Okay, thank you so much.